Thank you. Good morning, sisters in the law. As my colleague here said, I'd like to begin by thanking Pope Francis for having the foresight to convene this forum, the Pontifical Academy for inviting us, and the International Association of Women Judges for enabling us to come. I've submitted a paper, but I'm not going to read the whole of it because of time constraints. I'll nevertheless strive to follow it in material particulars. The International Labour Organization Report 2017 estimates that there are 40 million victims of modern slavery in the world, and it is most prevalent in Africa, with 7.6 per 1,000 people becoming victims. And rampant poverty is one of the drivers of this slavery. Trafficking in Uganda covers both adults of both sexes and children. It's more unfortunate for children as they may be maimed for life and are often killed. Recently, young women have also been targeted for kidnap, rape, and murder. Women and young girls are also trafficked for prostitution. Men are trafficked too. Trafficking in Uganda is both internal and external, and mainly for the same purposes. On the domestic scene, business companies place advertisements of availability of maids. Some maids are children who have been sent by their parents or guardians to earn an income after the parents have received token payments from such businesses. The maids are then deployed to whoever it may concern in domestic servitude, with no follow-up on what happens to them after and on whether they are properly treated or paid. Some are even sold into prostitution without due regard to their age. There is a new twist to enslavement of children. Parents and guardians Parents and guardians who are on the streets as beggars send their children to beg for stipends amidst dangerous traffic congestion around major cities and towns. Children may also be kidnapped to remove their body parts for ritual sacrifices. On transnational traffic, reports abound of Ugandans who have been lured abroad, mainly in the Middle East, with promises of jobs only to be trafficked for sexual slavery or become unpaid and mistreated laborers. Some are mistreated to such an extent that they commit suicide. Concerning children, they are adopted after luring their parents with false information about, and the parents only realize later that their children have been taken from them for good abroad. Statistics are hard to come by in Uganda. The latest figures available are for the year 2016. The government availed these statistics to the United States Department of State, which in their report of 2017 indicates that there were 114 trafficking investigations, 32 prosecutions in 20 cases, 16 convictions, and 270 victims were identified. Earlier in 2013, there were 837 registered trafficking victims. These figures are conservative, as not all cases of trafficking are reported. Trafficked persons include nationals of other states trafficked through Uganda, and others who are transferred through Uganda to South Africa and other countries. A baseline survey of 3 districts of Kampala, Yigang, and Moroto shows that nearly 4 out of 10 children who work in the informal sector setting in Kampala are victims of trafficking. So what is Uganda doing to address the problem of trafficking in persons? Uganda has ratified and or acceded to the following relevant international instrument: the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention of the Rights of the Child and Optional Protocol to the Convention of the Rights of the Child, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the United Nations Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, the United Nations Protocol Against Smuggling of Migrants by Land, Sea, and Air, the International Convention on the Protection of Rights of All Migrant Workers, and Human Rights Council Resolution 11/3 against trafficking in person. Uganda has also enacted a law entitled the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act 2009. This law punishes the following crimes: simple trafficking. Simple trafficking involves recruiting, hiring, maintaining, confining, transporting, transferring, harboring, or receiving a person, or facilitating the aforementioned acts through force or other forms of coercion for purposes of engaging that person in prostitution, pornography, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, involuntary servitude, death bondage, forced or arranged marriage. And such a person is liable to imprisonment for 15 years. The consent of the victim, or if it is a child, or the victim of trafficking, or if a child is irrelevant. Then we have aggravated trafficking. This aggravated trafficking is usually committed against children. If you are found guilty of aggravated trafficking, you are liable to imprisonment for life. Trafficking in children is any person who does any act referred to the acts which I've mentioned and uses a child in any armed conflict, removes any part or organ or tissue from the body of a child for purposes of human sacrifice, uses a child in the commission of a crime, abandons the child outside the country, uses a child or any body part of a child in witchcraft, rituals, and related practices, commits an offense of aggravated trafficking in children and may be liable to suffer death. Life imprisonment and death sentences, offenses that attract these penalties are triable by the High Court. I'll skip the definitions which you can find in my paper, and I'll go to a few cases which I've cited in my paper. Recently, the first case is this. Recently, the East African, a regional weekly newspaper, in its edition of October 21st to 27, 2017, ran an article on illegal adoptions entitled, "Kids for Sale, My Mom Was Tricked." It exposes how human traffickers rely on corruption in local courts and leaders' greed, leaving behind a trail of heartbroken families. It is a heart-rending story of a mother who was tricked into giving away her 7-year-old daughter for adoption. The mother never intended to give the daughter away. She had been told that her daughter, Martha, would be given a great education opportunity if she was sent away, but she would one day return. She was promised that she would always be part of her daughter's life. The adoptive parents were given a false story that the father had died and that the mother was not looking after her child properly and she had neglected her. The paperwork indicated that Martha never attended school, but in the months after she arrived in the US, as Martha's command of English improved, she spoke glowingly about her mother, how they cooked together, how they went to church together, and how her mother walked her to school. The adoptive parents realized that they had participated in taking a child from a loving family. This story was investigated by CNN, and it was found that many children like Martha are being trafficked, with American families not knowing the real stories behind their adoptions. They are being sold for as much as $15,000 to unsuspecting American families. This investigation was carried out by CNN. The second case I sat in last week and we dismissed it. This is a case of child trafficking, aggravated trafficking in children, contrary to the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act. This particular offense took place in 2010. I was sitting in an appeal. The convict removed the penis and testicles of the victim, a boy child, for purposes of human sacrifice. The land trial judge found that the victim was abducted for purposes of exploitation and that the accused participated in the crime. He convicted him as charged, and in sentencing him, the court took into account the fact that the victim's potential as a human being had been irreparably damaged. It is noted that child sacrifice is widespread in our communities. And the court observed that there was need to send a clear and an ambiguous message that there would be no mercy for anyone convicted of this heinous and absolutely inhuman crime. He was sentenced to 50 years imprisonment, but when the appeal came up for hearing, we were informed that he had died in prison, so the appeal abated. There are other cases I've cited, but let me go to the third case. This concerns transnational crime, and it was a terrorism case in which I sat again. This demonstrates the challenges facing developing countries in investigating and prosecuting terrorism-related offenses. In that case, the petitioners bombed revelers who were watching the World Cup. 70 people died, but they challenged the arraignment, and they came to the Constitution Court saying the arraignment was illegal because they had been abducted from their respective countries, Tanzania, Kenya, and others. The court did not find any involvement of the Ugandan security forces in the arrest and transfer of suspects, and upheld the arraignment. They were sentenced for murder. We have a lot of challenges, but we need to stick to the development goals, and as my colleagues have said, we need to ensure that we pursue the correct policies and priorities in addressing this evil. I thank you very much for listening to me.